The Galactic Council's shocking announcement. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a spectacle of both majesty and chaos. Alien representatives of every conceivable form filled the chamber, their conversations weaving a tapestry of languages, sounds, and gestures. Rows of curved seating rose like an amphitheater, each tier occupied by ambassadors from hundreds of species. The crystalline dome above captured the light of 3 suns, refracting it into cascading rainbows that danced across the polished obsidian floor. Yet, despite the beauty of the setting, the atmosphere buzzed with tension and intrigue. James Miller, the lone human representative, adjusted his black suit and scanned the room. Even after years of serving as Earth's ambassador, he never quite felt comfortable here. Among the reptilian Bravok, the multi-limbed Qian, and the towering blue-skinned Inmorian, James was an anomaly. His kind was new to this galactic stage, often dismissed as naive or primitive. Today, however, the attention on him felt more intense than usual. Whispers filled the air, and too many eyes, of varying shapes and numbers, were fixed on him. The chamber fell silent as the towering figure of the head speaker stepped onto the central platform. His presence commanded respect, his cerulean skin and elongated limbs marking him as a Zarnath, a species renowned for their wisdom and impartiality. He raised a long, spindly arm, and his deep voice echoed through the hall. Order. We are convened to announce the final will and testament of King Alder, ruler of the Stellar Empire. The crowd stilled further at the mention of King Alder. His recent death had shocked the galaxy. For over 2 centuries, he had presided over the largest and most influential empire in known space. The expectation was clear. The crown and all its burdens would pass to his eldest son, Prince Ray. But as the speaker began to read from the glowing crystal tablet in his hand, James noticed an odd pause. The crown and empire, the speaker intoned, shall pass to Prince Ray, as per tradition. A wave of nods and murmurs swept through the chamber. This part was no surprise. But then, the speaker's lips twitched as though suppressing a smirk before he continued. However, regarding the guardianship of Princess Rose, the king's youngest child, there is an unusual stipulation. The crowd erupted into hushed conversations. James caught snippets of alien languages, some expressing shock, others amusement. The speaker raised his voice, cutting through the noise. King Alder has appointed Earth's ambassador, James Miller, as the princess's legal guardian. The room descended into chaos. Laughter erupted from many corners, and James froze in his seat, certain he had misheard. Was this some elaborate prank? A test? He glanced around, noting the sneers and smirks directed his way. The speaker's voice rose again, silencing the crowd. The human ambassador shall take full responsibility for the princess's care, education, and well-being until she reaches the age of maturity in 50 standard years. James's mind raced. 50 years. He barely knew how to navigate galactic politics, and now he was being saddled with the care of a royal child from a species he barely understood. Why him? Before he could formulate a question, a silver-robed aristocrat from the Stellar Empire rose, his voice dripping with disdain. Surely this is a mistake, the aristocrat declared. To entrust the defective princess to a human. This cannot be the king's true intent. The speaker's expression remained neutral. The will has been authenticated and sealed. It is legally binding. James finally found his voice, though it came out strained. What do you mean by defective? A female aristocrat turned to him, her glittering robes catching the rainbow light. Her expression was a mix of pity and condescension. You don't know. Princess Rose was born with a genetic flaw. She's emotionally unstable, unable to control herself, a danger to herself and others. The king must have thought it fitting to place her in the care of. She gestured vaguely at him. Your kind. The words stung, but James schooled his expression. I see. And where is the princess now? She will be delivered to Earth's diplomatic compound within 3 standard days. The speaker replied, "Do you accept this guardianship, Ambassador Miller?" The question hung in the air. James could feel hundreds of eyes on him, their mockery barely concealed. They expected him to refuse, to confirm their belief that humans were weak and unfit for serious responsibility. Instead, James stood, straightened his suit, and spoke with unwavering resolve. "I accept." Laughter erupted once more, louder this time. Someone shouted, the unwanted taking in the unwanted. The insult hung in the air, but James remained unfazed. He met the speaker's gaze and added, "I only have one question. Did anyone ask Princess Rose what she wants?" The hall fell silent. The speaker blinked, his 4 eyes narrowing slightly. "The princess's wishes are irrelevant. The king's will is law." James nodded slowly. "Then I look forward to meeting my ward." He sat down as the laughter and whispers resumed around him. Let them laugh, he thought. They always laughed at humans, but something told him that this time, the joke wouldn't last for long. Meeting the defective princess. 3 days later, James Miller stood on the landing pad of Earth's diplomatic compound, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the polished surface. The air shimmered with anticipation, thick with tension as the compound staff gathered behind him. They had all heard the rumors. The so-called defective princess, disowned by her own people, now entrusted to a human ambassador. Whispers of doubt and curiosity filled the air, but James silenced them with a steady gaze. He was determined to meet this challenge head-on. In the distance, a sleek silver Imperial shuttle descended from the sky, its engines humming with an elegant precision that spoke of the stellar empire's technological superiority. The craft glided smoothly onto the pad, its reflective surface gleaming like a second sun. As the engines powered down, a hush fell over the assembled staff. James tugged at the collar of his suit, wondering what exactly he was about to face. The shuttle's doors opened with a soft hiss, and 2 tall royal guards emerged first. Their imposing figures were clad in gleaming armor, their expressions stern and unyielding. Then, a smaller figure stepped into view, her presence at once unassuming and otherworldly. Princess Rose. She was not what James had expected. Barely taller than a human teenager, Rose's petite frame made her seem fragile, though her movements betrayed a quiet grace. Her skin, pale blue like the rest of her species, glowed faintly under the sunlight, and her 4 silver eyes shimmered with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. She wore a simple white dress that swayed gently in the breeze, and in her hands she clutched a small unadorned bag. There was no entourage, no grandeur, only a young girl stepping into a foreign world. James stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Welcome to Earth, Your Highness. I am Ambassador James Miller." Rose descended the shuttle's ramp carefully, her gaze scanning the compound with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. When her eyes met James's, he felt an odd sensation, like a soft breeze brushing against his mind. It wasn't intrusive, more like a gentle probe, carrying traces of her emotions. Uncertainty, hope, fear. "Thank you for accepting me, Ambassador," Rose said, her voice melodic but quiet, with an unusual echo that lingered faintly in the air. "I know you had no choice in the matter." "Everyone has a choice, Your Highness," James replied, his tone firm but kind. "I chose to accept, and I'm glad I did." One of the royal guards stepped forward, breaking the moment. He handed James a small, glowing data crystal. "The princess's medical records and care instructions," the guard said stiffly. "She requires daily medication to suppress her condition." James took the crystal, his brows furrowing slightly as he noticed Rose flinch at the word condition. Her shoulders tightened, and for a moment, she looked even smaller. The guard continued, his tone clinical and detached. "She must not be allowed to." "Thank you." James cut him off firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll handle things from here." The guards exchanged a glance, clearly relieved to be rid of their charge. Within moments, they retreated into the shuttle, which lifted off with a low hum, leaving Rose standing alone with her small bag. The vast expanse of the landing pad made her look almost lost, a solitary figure dwarfed by the imposing surroundings. James softened his tone as he turned back to her. "Would you like to see your quarters, Your Highness?" "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As they walked through the compound, James couldn't help but notice the reactions of the staff they passed. Some paused mid-step, blinking as though disoriented. Others smiled inexplicably, while a few seemed overwhelmed by sudden emotion, tears welling in their eyes for no apparent reason. Rose kept her gaze low, clearly aware of the effect she had, but unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. "You feel it too, don't you?" Rose asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence as they entered the guest wing. James glanced at her. "Feel what?" "What I do to people," she said, lowering herself onto a couch in the spacious sitting room. She looked up at him, her silver eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and exhaustion. "It's not just empathy. It's more than that. I don't just sense emotions. I connect with them, amplify them. I can't control it." James sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "That's what the medication is for." She nodded, clutching her small bag tightly. "It dulls everything, blocks the connections, makes it manageable. But it also makes me feel empty, like I'm not really myself." James leaned forward, his voice steady. "On Earth, we have a saying. Different isn't defective. Your ability isn't a flaw, Rose. It's a part of you, a gift." Rose blinked, as though the word surprised her. "No one's ever called it a gift before. Father said it made me dangerous, that a ruler needs to be cold and logical." James smiled gently. "A ruler also needs to understand their people, to connect with them. Maybe your father misunderstood what your gift truly means." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. "Just Rose, please," she said softly. "I'm not really a princess anymore." "All right, Rose," James replied, leaning back with a warm grin. "And I'm just James. Now, would you like to try something? No medication, no rules, just you, exploring what you can really do." Rose hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But then she nodded, a spark of curiosity beginning to replace her fear. "All right, James, let's try." In that moment, James saw not a defective child, but the beginning of something extraordinary, uncovering hidden strengths. The days that followed marked a turning point for both James and Rose. They began to explore the potential of her abilities, peeling back the layers of fear and self-doubt that had been instilled in her since birth. For the first time, Rose was encouraged to embrace what had always been called her flaw, and in doing so, she began to uncover a strength that even she didn't fully understand. James had cleared his schedule to dedicate himself entirely to Rose's acclimation. He started each morning with simple exercises designed to help her understand and control her empathic abilities. They began with small, controlled interactions, conversations with the staff, observing how her emotions influenced theirs. At first, it was overwhelming. Rose could feel everything: the curiosity, the anxiety, even the skepticism of those who questioned whether James could manage such a daunting responsibility. "Focus on one emotion," James advised during one session, his voice calm and measured. "Don't let yourself be pulled in every direction. Find the strongest thread and follow it." Rose furrowed her brow, her silver eyes narrowing, as she concentrated on the young chef preparing their breakfast nearby. The woman was humming softly, but there was a nervous energy beneath her movements. Rose closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. A moment later, the humming stopped, and the chef turned, her expression softening into a smile. She was worried about burning the bread, Rose said, opening her eyes. I reassured her. James smiled. "See, that's not dangerous. It's helpful." You gave her confidence. "It's still strange," Rose admitted, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I don't always mean to connect. It just happens. That's why we're practicing, James said gently. The more you understand it, the more you'll be able to control it. The first real test. The first significant test of Rose's abilities came sooner than expected. A minor diplomatic meeting had been scheduled between Earth and a small coalition of trade-focused planets. Initially, James planned to shield Rose from the event, knowing that the Council's watchful eyes would amplify any missteps. But Rose insisted on attending. I need to know what I can do in real situations, she argued, her tone firm despite the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. If I stay hidden, I'll never learn. Reluctantly, James agreed. As they entered the meeting room, Rose's presence immediately drew attention. The coalition delegates, tall, insectoid beings with iridescent exoskeletons, regarded her with a mix of curiosity and caution. Their society valued precision and logic, viewing strong emotions as a hindrance. James knew they would be skeptical of Rose's involvement. The meeting began smoothly enough, with discussions about trade routes and tariffs. But tension began to rise as disagreements over resource allocation came to the forefront. Voices grew sharper, and the room's atmosphere thickened with frustration. James was preparing to intervene when he noticed Rose step forward. Please, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Let's take a moment. All eyes turned to her, and James held his breath. Rose closed her silver eyes, her expression serene, as she reached out with her empathic gift. A wave of calm spread through the room like a gentle breeze, softening the delegate's anger. When she opened her eyes again, she spoke, her tone soothing yet authoritative. I understand your concerns, she said, addressing the most agitated delegate. You feel your people are being undervalued, that their contributions are overlooked. But isn't it better to find a solution that benefits everyone? Anger won't serve your interests. It will only create more division. The delegate blinked, his posture relaxing as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The others nodded, their aggression dissipating. Within minutes, the meeting resumed, the tension replaced by a renewed spirit of cooperation. James watched in awe. Rose hadn't just calmed the room, she had steered it, guiding the delegates toward understanding without force or manipulation. When the meeting concluded, the coalition leader approached James with an astonished expression. Your ward, the leader said, glancing at Rose, is remarkable. I underestimated her. James nodded, pride swelling in his chest. We all did. Discovering confidence. That evening, as they returned to the compound, Rose seemed lighter, as though a burden she had carried for years had finally been lifted. She sat in a lounge, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape beyond the window. I didn't think I could do it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so afraid of making things worse. You didn't just do it, you excelled, James said, sitting beside her. And you didn't make things worse. You made them better. That's what your ability is for, Rose. Not control or power. Connection. For the first time, Rose allowed herself to smile without reservation. Do you think I could help more people? I know you can, James replied, his tone resolute, but you'll need to be ready. Not everyone will understand your gift, and there are those who will fear it. I know, she said, her expression turning serious, but I'm not afraid anymore. James felt a surge of hope. Rose was transforming before his eyes, stepping out of the shadow of her father's judgment and into her own light. What had started as an unwanted responsibility now felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. But even as they celebrated this small victory, James couldn't shake the feeling that their challenges were only just beginning. Somewhere, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, unseen forces were watching and waiting. The unseen threat. The success of the diplomatic meeting had bolstered both James and Rose, but their newfound confidence would soon be tested. In the days that followed, whispers began to reach James's ears, rumors of dissatisfaction within the stellar empire. Certain factions were displeased with Rose's growing prominence, viewing her as a liability to the imperial legacy. These murmurs carried an undertone of menace, and James knew they couldn't afford to ignore them. A dark warning. One evening, as James was going over reports in his office, his comm device buzzed with an urgent message. It was from an old ally, Ambassador Kren Vallis of the Talani, a species known for their extensive intelligence networks. The Talani ambassador's holographic image flickered to life, his angular face etched with concern. "James," Kren said, his voice low, "you need to be careful. I've intercepted communications suggesting there's a plot against your ward." James's heart sank. A plot? Against Rose? By whom? The messages are encrypted, but the intent is clear. Certain factions within the Stellar Empire see her as a threat. They fear what she represents, change. They believe eliminating her will preserve the Empire's traditions. James leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Do you have any specifics?" "Not yet," Kren admitted. "But the fact that this is being discussed at all is a bad sign. You must stay vigilant." James nodded grimly. "Thank you, Kren. If you learn anything else, let me know immediately." As the hologram flickered out, James leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had expected challenges, skepticism, even ridicule, but this was different. This was danger. Shadows in the compound. The next morning, James tightened security around the diplomatic compound. Extra guards were stationed at every entrance, and surveillance systems were upgraded. He didn't want to alarm Rose, but she was perceptive. It wasn't long before she confronted him. "Something's wrong," she said, her silver eyes scanning his face. "You're worried." James hesitated, then decided to be honest. "There's been talk, rumors of people who don't want you here, who might see you as a threat." Rose's expression didn't change, but James sensed her fear. She had spent her life being rejected, dismissed, and ridiculed. Now, it seemed, she might be targeted for something far worse. "I can handle it," she said softly, though her voice wavered slightly. "I won't let them scare me." James reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Rose. I promise you, no one will hurt you as long as I'm here." The first attack. The threat became all too real during a public event James had reluctantly agreed to attend. The Galactic Council was hosting a cultural exchange, a grand gathering designed to showcase the diversity of its member worlds. Rose, with her growing confidence, had insisted on accompanying James. It was her first major public appearance since arriving on Earth. The event was held in a sprawling atrium filled with representatives from dozens of species. Rose was both nervous and excited, her empathic abilities allowing her to feel the mix of awe, curiosity, and skepticism directed her way. James stayed close, watching for any signs of trouble. It came faster than he expected. As Rose stepped onto a stage to greet a delegation from the Volturi Alliance, a sudden ripple of hostility cut through the air. Rose froze, her silver eyes widening as she turned toward the source. A figure in the crowd, a cloaked individual whose face was obscured, moved swiftly, pulling out a sleek alien weapon. "Rose," James shouted, shoving her to the ground just as a bright beam of energy shot past them, narrowly missing her. The room erupted into chaos. Guards surged forward, tackling the would-be assassin, but James was focused entirely on Rose. "Are you hurt?" he asked, helping her to her feet. She shook her head, trembling. "No, but I felt it. I felt their hatred. It was so strong." James tightened his grip on her arm, guiding her off the stage as the guards subdued the attacker. The event was immediately evacuated, and James wasted no time getting Rose back to the compound. A fragile resolve. Back in the safety of the compound, Rose sat on a couch, staring at her hands. The fear in her eyes was raw, and for the first time since their journey together began, James saw doubt creeping back into her expression. "They really hate me," she whispered, "enough to want me dead." James knelt in front of her, his voice firm but gentle. Not everyone, Rose. There are people who see you for who you are. People who believe in you. She looked up at him, her silver eyes glistening with unshed tears. What if I'm not strong enough? You are, James said, his tone resolute. You've already shown more strength than most people ever could. This isn't about being perfect, it's about not giving up. And you haven't. Rose took a deep breath, nodding slowly. Then I won't. If they want me to be afraid, I won't give them the satisfaction. Preparing for what's next. The attempted attack had shaken them both, but it also solidified their resolve. James redoubled his efforts to ensure Rose's safety, while Rose herself began to take a more active role in preparing for what lay ahead. She worked harder to control her empathic abilities, pushing herself to refine her focus and expand her range. James enlisted trusted allies, like Crenvalis, to help uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. Unbeknownst to them, the events at the cultural exchange had sent ripples through the Galactic Council. Some viewed Rose's survival as a testament to her resilience, while others saw it as proof that she was a dangerous disruption. The unseen threat was growing, and James knew it was only a matter of time before it struck again. But as he watched Rose, her determination shining brighter than ever, he felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to thrive. And together, they would face whatever challenges the galaxy had in store. A test of loyalty. The attempt on Rose's life had cast a shadow over the days that followed. Though the attacker had been apprehended, their identity remained a mystery. Every effort to extract information from them yielded nothing but silence. Whoever was behind the plot was skilled, well-funded, and determined to see Rose removed. The implications were chilling, and the Galactic Council began to take notice. James received a summons, a formal inquiry into the events of the attack. The Council's tone was clear. Rose's presence was causing disruption, and some members were eager to exploit this moment to question her guardianship. For James, this was no mere formality. It was a test, one that could decide Rose's future and Earth's fragile position within the galactic community. The inquiry begins. The council chamber was as grand as ever, its domed ceiling glittering with refracted light. Hundreds of representatives sat in their tiers, their gazes heavy with expectation. James and Rose stood at the center of the room, a spotlight illuminating them like actors on a stage. The head speaker's voice echoed through the chamber. Ambassador James Miller, you have been called here to address the recent events surrounding the Princess Rose of the Stellar Empire. There are concerns regarding her safety, her influence, and the potential threat she may pose. James squared his shoulders. With respect, head speaker, the real question isn't about the threat Rose poses, but the threat posed to her. An attack on her life occurred on Galactic Council soil. That should concern us all. A murmur swept through the chamber, but the speaker raised a hand for silence. You claim that Princess Rose is a victim, yet her very presence disrupts the stability of our council. Reports suggest her empathic abilities influence those around her, sometimes without their consent. How do you address this? James turned to Rose, who stood silently beside him, her silver eyes scanning the room. He gave her a nod. This was her moment. Rose speaks. Rose stepped forward, her voice clear despite the tremble in her hands. I understand your concerns. My abilities are unusual. They make people uncomfortable. I felt that my entire life. She paused, meeting the gaze of as many representatives as she could. But discomfort doesn't mean danger. It means an opportunity to understand. Her words hung in the air for a moment before she continued. You've all heard the rumors. That I'm unstable. That I can't control myself. But those rumors don't define me. My father believed my empathy was a flaw because it didn't fit his idea of leadership. But what if leadership isn't about control or suppression? What if it's about connection? The room fell silent. Even the skeptics seemed captivated by her sincerity. Rose took a deep breath, her silver eyes shimmering. I don't want to harm anyone. All I want is to use what I've been given to help, to bring people together. Isn't that what this council is supposed to represent? A test of loyalty. The attempt on Rose's life had cast a shadow over the days that followed. Though the attacker had been apprehended, their identity remained a mystery. Every effort to extract information from them yielded nothing but silence. Whoever was behind the plot was skilled, well-funded, and determined to see Rose removed. The implications were chilling, and the Galactic Council began to take notice. James received a summons, a formal inquiry into the events of the attack. The Council's tone was clear. Rose's presence was causing disruption, and some members were eager to exploit this moment to question her guardianship. For James, this was no mere formality. It was a test, one that could decide Rose's future and Earth's fragile position within the galactic community. The inquiry begins. The council chamber was as grand as ever, its domed ceiling glittering with refracted light. Hundreds of representatives sat in their tiers, their gazes heavy with expectation. James and Rose stood at the center of the room, a spotlight illuminating them like actors on a stage. The head speaker's voice echoed through the chamber. "Ambassador James Miller, you have been called here to address the recent events surrounding the Princess Rose of the Stellar Empire. There are concerns regarding her safety, her influence, and the potential threat she may pose." James squared his shoulders. "With respect, head speaker, the real question isn't about the threat Rose poses, but the threat posed to her. An attack on her life occurred on Galactic Council soil. That should concern us all." A murmur swept through the chamber, but the speaker raised a hand for silence. "You claim that Princess Rose is a victim, yet her very presence disrupts the stability of our council. Reports suggest her empathic abilities influence those around her, sometimes without their consent. How do you address this?" James turned to Rose, who stood silently beside him, her silver eyes scanning the room. He gave her a nod. This was her moment. "Rose speaks." Rose stepped forward, her voice clear despite the tremble in her hands. "I understand your concerns. My abilities are unusual. They make people uncomfortable. I've felt that my entire life." She paused, meeting the gaze of as many representatives as she could. "But discomfort doesn't mean danger. It means an opportunity to understand." Her words hung in the air for a moment before she continued. "You've all heard the rumors. That I'm unstable. That I can't control myself. But those rumors don't define me. My father believed my empathy was a flaw because it didn't fit his idea of leadership. But what if leadership isn't about control or suppression? What if it's about connection?" The room fell silent. Even the skeptics seemed captivated by her sincerity. Rose took a deep breath, her silver eyes shimmering. "I don't want to harm anyone. All I want is to use what I've been given to help, to bring people together. Isn't that what this council is supposed to represent?" The council divided. Rose's words left an undeniable impression, but not everyone was convinced. A representative from the Stellar Empire rose, his silver robes glinting under the light. "This is all very touching," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "But emotions don't govern galaxies. Logic and order do. The princess's presence here is a distraction. She is a liability, and her continued existence risks destabilizing the empire." James stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room. "With respect, Representative, what destabilizes the empire is fear. Fear of change. Fear of someone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of worthiness. Rose isn't a liability. She's an opportunity. An opportunity to show that this council values all its members, regardless of their origins or differences." The head speaker interjected, his tone measured. "Your argument is noted, Ambassador. But the question remains, can the council and the galaxy at large trust the princess's abilities?" A demonstration of strength. Rose turned to the head speaker, her voice steady. "Would you allow me to demonstrate? Not to influence or manipulate, but to show you what I can do." The speaker hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Rose closed her eyes, her expression serene as she reached out with her empathy. A ripple of emotion spread through the chamber, gentle and calming, like a warm breeze. The tension in the room began to dissolve, and representatives who had been leaning forward with skepticism now sat back, their faces softening. Rose spoke, her voice carrying the weight of her gift. "This is what I am. Not a weapon, not a threat, but someone who feels, who understands. I don't need to take from you. I only want to give." When she opened her eyes, the chamber was silent. Even the most critical representatives seemed moved, though some quickly masked their reactions. The head speaker studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Your demonstration is noted, Princess Rose. The council will deliberate." The aftermath. As James and Rose exited the chamber, the weight of what had just transpired pressed down on them. The council was divided, and the outcome of their deliberations remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: Rose had made an impact. "You were incredible in there," James said as they walked back to the compound. "No matter what happens, you showed them who you really are." Rose gave him a faint smile. "I just hope it's enough." "It is," James said firmly. "And even if they don't see it now, they will." But as they reached the compound, James couldn't shake the feeling that the forces arrayed against them were far from finished. The inquiry had been a test, a probe to gauge their strength. Whatever came next would be more dangerous, more calculated. Still, as he looked at Rose, standing taller and more confident than ever, he knew they would face it together. Confronting the conspirators, the Galactic Council's inquiry had shaken James and Rose, but also solidified their resolve. Despite the mixed reactions from the representatives, Rose had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of her detractors. A small victory, but one that left them vulnerable to the unseen forces working against them. It was only a matter of time before those forces struck again. James returned to his office, poring over intelligence reports and encrypted messages intercepted by his allies. The picture they painted was troubling. Whispers of a faction within the Stellar Empire seeking to destabilize the Council were growing louder. Their target was clear: Rose. A message in the dark. One evening, as James was preparing for another round of security briefings, his comm device buzzed with a secure transmission. It was Kren Vallis again, his angular face appearing on the holographic display. "James," Kren said, his voice urgent. "I've uncovered more information. The plot against Rose runs deeper than we thought." James leaned forward, his brows furrowed. "What have you found?" Kren hesitated, his expression grim. "The conspirators are not just aristocrats clinging to outdated traditions. They've aligned with rogue elements in the Galactic Council itself. Their goal isn't just to remove Rose, it's to fracture the alliance between Earth and the Stellar Empire." James felt a chill run down his spine. "Why target Earth?" "Because you represent change," Kren replied. "Humanity's rise in the Council is disrupting the balance of power. Rose's empathy and your support for her threaten the old guard. They're using her as a scapegoat to justify their agenda." James's jaw tightened. "Do we have names?" "Not yet," Kren admitted, "but I've traced communications to a meeting scheduled on Anarian Prime. The conspirators will be gathering there in 2 standard days." James's mind raced. Anarian Prime was a neutral planet known for its sprawling urban centers and secretive dealings. If they could intercept the meeting, they might finally expose the faction working against them. "Thank you, Kren," James said. "Send me the coordinates." Preparing for Anarian Prime. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. James worked closely with his security team, devising a covert plan to infiltrate the meeting on Anarian Prime. Rose insisted on coming along, her determination unwavering. "I'm a part of this," she said firmly. "They're targeting me. I have to face them." James hesitated but finally relented. "All right, but you stay close to me at all times. This isn't just politics anymore. It's a battlefield." Rose nodded, her silver eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. "I understand." They boarded a discreet diplomatic shuttle, leaving the safety of Earth's compound behind. As the ship entered hyperspace, James couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about Rose anymore. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy and the ideals they were fighting to protect. The meeting on Anarian Prime. Anarian Prime's capital city was a labyrinth of towering spires and shadowed alleys, its skyline bathed in the neon glow of countless advertisements. The air buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the danger lurking beneath its surface. Disguised as a trade delegation, James and Rose navigated the city's crowded streets, their every move shadowed by plainclothes security agents. The meeting was set to take place in an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. As they approached the location, James signaled his team to fan out and secure the perimeter. He and Rose slipped into the building, their footsteps echoing softly in the dimly lit space. Inside, a group of figures stood around a central table, their faces obscured by hoods. The air was thick with tension as they discussed their plans, unaware of the intruders listening from the shadows. "They're too weak to lead," one voice said, dripping with contempt. "The princess is an aberration, and the humans are nothing more than opportunists." Another figure nodded. "The council has grown complacent. It's time to remind them who holds the real power." Rose clenched her fists, her empathic abilities picking up on their hatred. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, signaling her to stay calm. The confrontation. When the moment was right, James stepped into the light, his presence commanding. "Interesting conversation," he said, his tone cold. "But I think you forgot to send me an invitation." The conspirators froze, their shock quickly turning to anger. One of them reached for a concealed weapon, but before they could act, Rose stepped forward. Her silver eyes glowed faintly as she unleashed her empathy, flooding the room with a wave of paralyzing calm. "You talk about power," Rose said, her voice steady and filled with quiet strength. "But all I feel from you is fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing control. You think hatred makes you strong, but it only makes you weak." The conspirators struggled against the emotional weight pressing down on them, their bravado crumbling under the force of Rose's presence. James stepped closer, his gaze sharp. "You've been exposed. Surrender now, and maybe the council will show you mercy." One of the leaders snarled, his voice trembling with defiance. "You think you've won. This is bigger than us. The galaxy won't follow a broken girl or her knave guardian." James smirked. "We'll see about that." At his signal, his security team moved in, quickly subduing the conspirators. As they were taken into custody, James turned to Rose, pride evident in his eyes. "You were incredible," he said. Rose gave a faint smile, though her exhaustion was clear. "It's not over yet." Unveiling the truth. The conspirators were brought before the Galactic Council, their plots laid bare. Evidence collected from Anarian Prime revealed the depth of their schemes, implicating several prominent figures in the Stellar Empire and beyond. The Council was forced to confront its own divisions, and for the first time, many representatives began to see Rose not as a liability, but as a symbol of resilience. James and Rose stood together as the head speaker addressed the assembly. The actions of these individuals were a betrayal not just of their people, but of the ideals this council was founded upon. Let this be a reminder that unity, not fear, is our greatest strength. The chamber erupted in applause, and for the first time, Rose felt a glimmer of acceptance. She wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to thrive. And though the road ahead would be long, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. A new legacy. The exposure of the conspirators had sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. For centuries, the Council had prided itself on being a bastion of unity and order, yet the betrayal of its own members revealed cracks in its foundation. The revelations brought both condemnation and a renewed call for reform, and at the center of it all stood Princess Rose and Ambassador James Miller. The aftermath of Anarian Prime. Back on Earth, the diplomatic compound was abuzz with activity. Messages of support flooded in from unexpected quarters. Representatives, citizens, and even former skeptics within the council. Rose's actions had turned the tide of public opinion, transforming her from an object of ridicule into a beacon of hope. James observed her from the doorway of her study, where she was poring over reports and proposals. She was no longer the timid girl who had stepped off the Imperial shuttle weeks ago. There was a quiet strength in her now, a determination that was impossible to ignore. "You're making waves," James said, stepping inside. Rose looked up, a faint smile on her lips. "Good waves, I hope." "The best kind," he replied. "The council is already talking about new measures to prevent corruption. They're even considering reforms to give more weight to empathy and leadership. That's because of you." Rose's smile widened, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm glad, but there's still so much to do. The galaxy doesn't change overnight." James nodded, pulling up a chair. "No, it doesn't. But you've proven that change is possible. That's the first step." Rising challenges. Despite the newfound support, there were still those who viewed Rose as a threat. The conspiracies' leaders had been removed, but their ideology lingered in the minds of traditionalists who saw empathy as weakness and humanity as outsiders. These factions began to consolidate their efforts, spreading propaganda and attempting to undermine Rose's credibility. One day, during a council session, a representative from the Celery Coalition stood to address the assembly. His tone was sharp, his words calculated. "While we commend the efforts of Ambassador Miller and Princess Rose in uncovering corruption, we must ask, what guarantees do we have that such powers will not be abused in the future?" The question hung in the air, and James could feel the tension rising. Before he could respond, Rose stood, her presence commanding despite her youth. "With respect, Representative," she said, her voice calm but firm, "no power is free from the risk of abuse. The same could be said of wealth, technology, or political authority. The difference lies in how it's used. My abilities are not a weapon. They are a bridge, a way to connect, to understand, and to heal." Her words resonated deeply, and though the representative's skepticism didn't vanish, the murmurs of agreement from the assembly were unmistakable. Rose was no longer a passive figure in her own story. She was a leader, a mission of unity. As Rose's influence grew, she and James began receiving invitations from planets across the galaxy. Leaders sought her guidance in resolving disputes, her empathy proving invaluable in bridging divides that logic alone could not. One particularly challenging mission took them to the war-torn planet of Veridan. For decades, two factions had been locked in a brutal civil war, their hatred fueled by generations of mistrust. Attempts at diplomacy had failed, with both sides unwilling to come to the table. Rose insisted on going, despite the risks. "If we can bring peace to Veridan," she told James, "we'll show the galaxy what's possible." The journey was perilous, the atmosphere on Veridan tense. When Rose and James met with the leaders of the warring factions, the hostility in the room was palpable. Voices were raised, accusations flew, and James wondered if they had made a mistake in coming. But Rose remained calm. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her empathy. The emotions in the room were a storm: anger, fear, sorrow. But she found the threads of common ground. Slowly, she began to speak, her words carrying the weight of the emotions she had felt. "I know you're afraid," she said, her voice steady. "Afraid of losing what you fought so hard to protect. Afraid of being betrayed. But what if you're not so different? What if the pain you feel is the same pain they feel?" Her words, combined with the wave of calm she projected, began to soften the tension. For the first time in decades, he raised his cup in a mock toast. "To a new era. To a new legacy," she replied, clinking her cup against his. As they stood together under the starlit sky, they knew their journey was far from over. But they also knew that they had already begun to change the galaxy, not through power or force, but through empathy, understanding, and the unyielding belief that even the most broken among them could build something extraordinary.